you're the one who makes appointments.
And you're the one who doesn't keep them.
What do you want? Who are you?
Dave Jenkins.
Hollywood seemed perfect from the outside. But Henry Fonda knew the ugly truth. After starring in The Grapes of Wrath, he became trapped in a nightmare, bullied by power-hungry studios, betrayed by his closest friend, and physically attacked on set. The shocking fight with director wasn't just a punch in the face. It was the breaking point after years of abuse that Hollywood tried to hide. Today, we reveal the shocking Hollywood battle that left one of America's greatest actors broken, bitter, and completely alone. Henry Fonda was born on May 16, 1905, in Grand Island, Nebraska. His family history stretched back centuries. The Fondas came from Genoa, Italy, in the 1400s. They fled due to persecution, settled in Holland, and later moved to America in the early 1600s. They became some of the first Dutch settlers in the country and even founded a small town in upstate New York named Fonda. One of Henry's ancestors, Douw Fonda, was killed during a raid, but the family endured. Henry grew up in a modest home. His father worked in advertising and printing. His family followed Christian Science, a belief system that relied on prayer instead of doctors. Henry was quiet and reserved. He liked skating, swimming, and running, but kept to himself, especially around girls outside his family. His shy nature would later shape the kind of roles he played on screen. One moment from his childhood stayed with him forever. In 1919, at just 14 years old, he witnessed the brutal lynching of Will Brown during the Omaha race riots. The sight of an innocent man being murdered by a violent mob shocked him. It opened his eyes to the realities of racial injustice and shaped the way he saw the world. That experience would influence the kinds of characters he played later in his career. Men who stood up for what was right. Henry never planned to be an actor. At first, he wanted to be a journalist. After graduating from Omaha Central High School in 1923, he enrolled at the University of Minnesota to study journalism. His father insisted that he work while attending school, so Henry took 2 jobs. He worked as a physical education instructor and also took a job at Northwestern Bell Telephone Company. Balancing school and work became too much, and after 2 years, he dropped out. Back in Omaha, he looked for a job in journalism, but had no luck. Then something unexpected happened. His mother's friend, Dodie Brando, the mother of future Hollywood star Marlon Brando, suggested he try acting. She encouraged him to audition for a play at the Omaha Community Playhouse. Henry had never acted before, but he decided to give it a shot. He landed the role of Ricky in You and I. At first, he wasn't sure if he belonged on stage. He was nervous, unsure of himself, but something changed during rehearsals. He felt drawn to acting in a way he had never felt about anything else. It wasn't just about being in front of an audience. He loved everything about the theater. He helped build sets, ushered people to their seats, and learned as much as he could. His father wasn't happy about this new passion. Acting didn't seem like a real career. But when he saw Henry perform, his opinion changed. He realized his son had talent. Henry's path was set. Acting wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was his future. In 1928, he left Omaha and moved to New York City to pursue theater professionally. That same year, he joined the University Players Guild, a summer stock theater company in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It was there that he met 2 people who would change his life, James Stewart and Margaret Sullivan. Henry started with small roles, but he worked hard and improved with every performance. One of his standout roles was Tornaquincy in The Jest. The more he acted, the more confident he became. His natural style of acting set him apart. While many actors at the time were dramatic and theatrical, Henry's performances felt real. The University Players was more than just a stepping stone for his career. It also led to his first marriage. He and Margaret Sullivan got married in 1931, though their relationship lasted only 2 years. Their connection remained strong even after the divorce. Around this time, Henry and James Stewart became roommates. The two men were complete opposites. Stewart was conservative while Fonda was liberal, but their friendship lasted a lifetime. As Henry gained more experience, people started to take notice. Broadway came calling. He reprised his role from The Jest for professional audiences, and his performances earned him a reputation for being authentic and compelling. He had a quiet intensity that made his characters feel real. Hollywood soon took interest. By 1935, after years of struggling through the Great Depression, Henry landed his first major film role in The Farmer Takes a Wife. At first, he wasn't sure about a film career, but audiences loved him. His salary jumped to $3,000 per week, a huge change from the struggles he had faced during the Depression. His second film, I Dream Too Much, 1935, proved he was more than just another new face. The New York Times called him the most likable of the new crop of romantic juveniles. In The Trail of the Lonesome Pine, 1936, the first outdoor Technicolor film, he showed he could do more than romance. He had a presence on screen that made people believe in the characters he played. By the late 1930s, he was one of Hollywood's most promising stars. His big breakthrough came with Young Mr. Lincoln, 1939, where he played Abraham Lincoln as a young lawyer. He gave Lincoln a quiet strength that made the role feel real, and it marked the start of his long collaboration with director John Ford. The following year, he took on an even bigger challenge, playing Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath, 1940. Based on John Steinbeck's novel, the film told the story of a man fighting for his family's survival during the Great Depression. It was a role that defined Fonda's career, earning him his first Academy Award nomination. His performance captured the struggles of ordinary Americans, making him more than just a movie star. He became a symbol of resilience. Fonda's ability to bring depth to every role made him a perfect fit for westerns. In Jesse James, 1939, he played Frank James, a character audiences saw as noble and principled. The film's success led to a sequel, The Return of Frank James, 1940. He returned to the genre in My Darling Clementine, 1946, playing Wyatt Earp, a lawman facing off against outlaws in a reimagining of the famous gunfight at the OK Corral. But Fonda wasn't limited to playing heroes. In The Oxbow Incident, 1943, he tackled the harsh reality of mob justice. The film showed the dangers of rushing to judgment, something Fonda had witnessed firsthand as a teenager. One of his most shocking performances came decades later in Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968. Director Sergio Leone cast him against type as Frank, a ruthless killer with no remorse. Audiences were stunned. Leone insisted on keeping Fonda's famous blue eyes visible in every scene, using his familiar look to make the character even more disturbing. The contrast between Fonda's usual roles and this cold-blooded villain made the performance unforgettable. Outside of westerns, Fonda gave one of his most powerful performances in 12 Angry Men, 1957. He played Juror Number 8, the only person willing to question the jury's guilty verdict in a tense courtroom drama. The film was all about reason and justice, two things Fonda portrayed with quiet intensity. He wasn't just acting, he was making a statement about fairness and standing up for what was right. His approach to acting was different from many of his peers. He earned the nickname One Take Fonda because he rarely needed a second try. He prepared so thoroughly that by the time the cameras rolled, he was already in character. For The Grapes of Wrath, he studied Steinbeck's novel to fully understand Tom Joad's struggles. Before playing Wyatt Earp, he read real accounts of the lawman's life to make sure his portrayal felt authentic. He didn't rely on flashy performances or dramatic outbursts. Instead, he played his characters with a quiet strength that made them feel real. Henry Fonda was already a Hollywood star when World War II changed everything. He had starred in The Grapes of Wrath in 1940 and had built a strong career, but none of that mattered to him when the war began. On August 22, 1942, at the age of 37, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He could have stayed in Hollywood, making war movies like many actors did, but that wasn't enough for him. "I don't want to be in a fake war in a studio," he said. He wanted to serve for real. Fonda had a college education, which meant he could have started as an officer, but he refused. He enlisted as a regular seaman, believing he should prove himself like any other man. His dedication didn't go unnoticed. Within a year, he was promoted to lieutenant junior grade and assigned to the USS Curtis AV-4. He served as an assistant air operations officer and later as an air combat intelligence officer. He took part in critical Pacific battles, including the Marianas and Iwo Jima. His work in air operations planning earned him the Bronze Star, a recognition of his valuable contributions. His time in the Navy put his acting career on hold, but it gave him something far more lasting. When he returned in 1945, he wasn't the same man who had left. The war had changed him. He had seen death, destruction, and the brutal realities of combat. That kind of experience doesn't just fade away. His family felt the difference more than anyone. His children, Jane and Peter Fonda, would later describe their father as distant and emotionally closed off. Jane recalled how he made her feel like she had to be perfect to be loved. Peter remembered that their father never told them, "I love you," until much later in life. His wife at the time, Frances Ford Seymour, struggled with depression, and Fonda's cold demeanor only made things worse. Their marriage ended in tragedy when Frances took her own life in 1950. His acting also changed. Before the war, he had played quiet, strong-willed characters, but now there was something deeper in his performances. His roles carried more weight, more emotion hidden beneath the surface. But even as his skills sharpened, his career stalled. The late 1940s were a difficult time for him. Hollywood was shifting, new stars were rising, and Fonda struggled to find the right roles. Instead of taking lesser films, he turned to Broadway. In 1948, he took the lead in Mr. Roberts, a stage adaptation of Thomas Hagen's novel about life aboard a Navy cargo ship. The play resonated with him, reflecting his own wartime experiences. It was a massive success, running for over 3 years with 1,157 performances. Fonda won a Tony Award for Best Actor, proving he was still one of America's finest performers. Henry Fonda and John Ford created some of the greatest films in Hollywood history. Their partnership brought audiences The Grapes of Wrath in 1940 and My Darling Clementine in 1946. These films didn't just showcase their talents, they shaped the future of American cinema. Fonda's subtle and powerful acting combined with Ford's ability to tell visually stunning stories made their work unforgettable. When The Grapes of Wrath was released in 1940, it hit audiences hard. Based on John Steinbeck's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, the film told the story of Tom Joad and his family as they struggled to survive during the Great Depression. Fonda played Tom with quiet determination, making the character both heartbreaking and inspiring. His performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The film itself was a huge success, bringing in $1.1 million in its first year. That was a massive number at the time. Ford won an Oscar for Best Director, and the film became more than just a story. It was a statement about survival, injustice, and hope. 6 years later, Ford and Fonda worked together again on My Darling Clementine. This time, Fonda played Wyatt Earp in a reimagined version of the gunfight at the OK Corral. His performance made Earp feel larger than life, yet completely real. Ford had a personal connection to the story. He had spoken with the real Wyatt Earp years earlier and had listened to him describe the famous gunfight. Ford used those memories to shape the film, turning it into one of the most influential westerns ever made. The movie blended history and myth, giving audiences a version of the Old West that felt poetic and authentic at the same time. But while their films were smooth and polished, their working relationship was anything but. Ford had a reputation for being harsh, sometimes even cruel, to the people he worked with. He expected complete control on set, and if he didn't get it, he lashed out. Fonda respected Ford's talent, but never liked the way he treated people. Over time, their partnership became more strained. The breaking point came in 1955 when they worked together on Mr. Roberts. Henry Fonda's role in Mr. Roberts on Broadway became one of the most important moments of his career. The play, based on Thomas Hagen's novel, opened on February 18, 1948. It ran for an incredible 1,157 performances until January 6, 1951. Fonda played Lieutenant Douglas Roberts, a Navy officer stuck on a cargo ship during World War II. The character was caught between his duty and his frustration over not being in combat. Fonda's performance was so powerful that he won a Tony Award for Best Actor. The role felt personal to him. He had served as a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy during the war, which made his performance even more believable. Even with his success on stage, Warner Brothers didn't want him for the film adaptation. By the early 1950s, Fonda was 49 and had been away from Hollywood for years. The studio thought he was too old for the role of a junior-grade lieutenant. They also doubted his ability to draw audiences after so much time away. Warner Brothers wanted younger stars like Marlon Brando or William Holden instead. But director John Ford refused to let the role go to anyone else. He believed Fonda was the only actor who could bring Roberts to life. His determination got Fonda the part, but it also set the stage for serious problems during production. Even after Fonda was cast, Warner Brothers still had concerns. They wanted Mr. Roberts to appeal to as many people as possible, so they worked closely with Ford to change parts of the story. Some of the darker elements were toned down, including aspects of Captain Morton's character. The studio also controlled technical decisions. At first, Mr. Roberts was supposed to be filmed in 3D using Warner Superscope, but the studio changed its mind. By the time production started, 3D had lost popularity, so they switched to CinemaScope. This shift added even more complications to an already difficult shoot. Meanwhile, Fonda and Ford clashed from the beginning. John Ford was a legend in Hollywood. He directed some of the greatest films ever made, but behind the camera, he was a different story. He could be volatile, unpredictable, and at times, outright abusive. One of the most infamous moments in his career happened in 1954, on the set of Mr. Roberts. The film was supposed to be a smooth transition from stage to screen. Instead, it became a battleground. Henry Fonda had played the title role on Broadway, and he cared deeply about the film adaptation. He wasn't just acting in it. He wanted to make sure it honored the original play. But there was a problem. Ford's version of the script didn't sit right with him. He thought it lacked the humor and emotional weight that made the stage production a success. Fonda voiced his concerns to producer Leland Hayward, who arranged a meeting between the actor and the director. It didn't go well. Ford, lounging with a drink in his hand, listened as Fonda laid out his issues with the script. But before Fonda could finish, Ford suddenly stood up and punched him in the face. Just like that. One moment they were discussing the film, the next, everything had changed. Their 16-year friendship, along with their professional partnership spanning 8 films, was over. Ford later apologized, but it didn't matter. Fonda never forgave him. He considered that moment the end of their relationship and never worked with Ford again. It wasn't just about the punch, it was about what it revealed. Ford's erratic and often cruel behavior had always been there, but this time it had gone too far. On set, he was drinking heavily, reportedly downing a case of beer every day. The incident only reinforced what many already knew. Ford was a brilliant filmmaker, but he could also be a tyrant. His unpredictable nature wasn't limited to Fonda. James Cagney, who played Captain Morton in the film, had his own battles with the director. The tension started before filming even began. When they first met at the airport, Ford looked Cagney in the eye and said, "We're going to tangle asses." It wasn't a joke. Ford had a history of testing his actors, pushing them to see how much they could take. Cagney, however, wasn't someone who backed down. On the first day of shooting, he arrived slightly late. That was all the excuse Ford needed. He tore into Cagney in front of the entire crew. But Cagney wasn't about to be humiliated. He interrupted Ford mid-rant and said, "When I started this picture, you said we would tangle asses before this was over. I'm ready now. Are you?" Ford wasn't expecting that. He backed down, but the hostility lingered. Cagney later described Ford as a nasty old man who treated everyone on set terribly. The atmosphere was tense, not just for Cagney, but for Fonda and Jack Lemmon as well. Ford's behavior wasn't just a personal issue, it was affecting the entire production. Then, just a few weeks after punching Fonda, Ford was hospitalized. His drinking had caught up with him, and he needed gallbladder surgery. Warner Brothers had no choice but to replace him. They brought in Mervyn LeRoy, a veteran director known for being steady and reliable, exactly what the production needed. LeRoy took a different approach. Ford had envisioned a film with broader comedy and irreverence, but LeRoy leaned closer to the original play. The shift in tone was noticeable, and not everyone was happy about it. Both Ford and Fonda reportedly disliked the final product. Even with all these struggles, Mr. Roberts became a huge success. It made $21 million at the box office against a $2 million budget. Warner Brothers got what they wanted, but for Fonda, the experience was exhausting. He had fought hard to keep the role, but the production tested his patience like never before. His performance in the film became one of his most celebrated, yet behind the scenes, it was a battle filled with conflict, frustration, and the end of an important friendship. Henry Fonda's personal life was filled with as much drama as the roles he played on screen. He was married 5 times, and each relationship exposed a different side of him. His first marriage in 1931 to actress Margaret Sullivan lasted only 2 months. Their personalities clashed from the start. Sullivan was fiery and outspoken, while Fonda was quiet and reserved. Their arguments became too much, and the marriage quickly ended. In 1936, he married Frances Ford Seymour, a Canadian-American socialite. This marriage lasted much longer, bringing 2 children into the world, Jane and Peter Fonda, who would later become Hollywood stars. But the relationship was troubled. Francis struggled with mental health issues, and Fonda was emotionally distant. In 1949, after 13 years together, he told her he wanted a divorce because he was in love with another woman. That woman was Susan Blanchard, 20 years younger than him. Frances was devastated. Already battling depression, she checked into Craig House Sanitarium for treatment. The betrayal was too much. On April 14, 1950, she stole a razor from the facility and took her own life. Jane was 12. Peter was 10. Fonda told them their mother had died of heart failure. He even refused to let them attend her funeral. For years, they believed the lie. Later that same year, he married Susan Blanchard. Their relationship didn't last. She later said she felt like a geisha, always trying to please him while he stayed cold and distant. After 5 years, their marriage ended. His fourth marriage, to Italian Baroness Afdera Franchetti, began in 1957. That one ended in divorce by 1961. His fifth and final marriage came in 1965. This time, he married Shirley May Adams, and they stayed together until his death in 1982. But by then, the damage from his past relationships had already left deep scars on his family. Jane and Peter grew up with a father who kept his emotions locked away. Peter later recalled how Fonda once accused him of stealing candy and punished him in a way that left him terrified. Jane struggled with self-image, shaped by her father's comments about beauty and perfection. After their mother's death, Fonda sent them to boarding schools or to live with relatives, creating even more distance between them. Years later, they finally found some closure. Shortly before his death, Fonda told Peter he loved him, words he had never said before. Jane also made peace with their relationship, but the emotional wounds never fully healed. Henry Fonda was 76 when he gave one of the most powerful performances of his career. On Golden Pond, 1981, was more than just another film. It was a deeply personal story about aging, family, and making peace with the past. Fonda played Norman Thayer Jr., an old professor facing the reality of his final years. His real-life daughter, Jane Fonda, played his estranged daughter in the film, making their on-screen relationship feel even more authentic. The role earned him his first and only Academy Award for Best Actor at the 54th Oscars. At the time, he was the oldest person to ever win the award. His health had already started to fail, so he couldn't attend the ceremony. Jane accepted the Oscar for him, saying her father would probably just smile and say, "Well, ain't I lucky?" It was a simple moment, but one that captured who Henry Fonda was. The film was a huge success, earning $119.3 million at the box office and becoming the second highest-grossing movie of 1981 in North America. It was nominated for 10 Academy Awards and won 3: Best Actor for Fonda, Best Actress for Katharine Hepburn, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Ernest Thompson. But what made On Golden Pond unforgettable was Fonda's raw honesty. His performance felt real because it was real. He was in poor health, suffering from heart problems and prostate cancer, and he poured everything he had left into the role. It became his last theatrical film, and in many ways, it felt like a farewell letter to the world. But his legacy was already secure. Decades earlier, he had starred in some of the most important films ever made. In 12 Angry Men, 1957, he played Juror Number 8, the only man in a jury willing to question a guilty verdict in a murder trial. The film, directed by Sidney Lumet, was a tense and emotional look at justice and morality. Fonda's performance was subtle but powerful. He didn't need big speeches or dramatic gestures. He just sat there, calm and steady, pushing back against prejudice and doubt. His quiet determination made him the heart of the film. Then, in 1968, he did something no one expected. Sergio Leone cast him as Frank, a cold-blooded killer in Once Upon a Time in the West. It was the complete opposite of everything Fonda had ever played before. Audiences were used to seeing him as the noble hero, the man who stood for what was right. But in this film, he was terrifying. His blue eyes, which had always seemed kind and thoughtful, now looked cold and merciless. The film was both a tribute to and a deconstruction of the classic Western, and Fonda's performance was a big part of that. From the unwavering moral compass of 12 angry men to the chilling villain in Once Upon a Time in the West, Fonda showed the world that he was more than just a leading man. He was an actor who could take risks and completely transform himself. And with On Golden Pond, he gave one last performance that reminded everyone why he had been one of the greatest actors of his time. Even in his final moments on screen, he was unforgettable.